You can't sanitize all the wars, so it has to keep a balance between what is the truth of this event and what you can show without traumatizing all the people looking at it.
You cannot make the war nicer, you know, you cannot put some kind of censorship and change the image like we are doing, changing our vocabulary.
It's graphic, frightening, and it's painful to watch.
We cannot do this with the images, then that would be the end of the information.
Otherwise we just think, okay, it's all fine, nice battle, and we can all carry on, you know, living in Plato's cave of flickering lights.
How much of your understanding of the Gaza war would be lost if you hadn't seen this image? The chemical attack in Syria. Did the public really need to see this? How did this photo add to the coverage of the Malaysian plane crash in Ukraine? These are questions photojournalists and editors struggle with constantly. The balance between informing the viewer without causing offence.
Last year in Syria, in Aleppo, the images that came back, very graphic as they were, of children who'd sort of been laid out having been victims of a chemical weapons attack. That was obviously incredibly upsetting to see, and I think what it did do was illustrate, not only bring evidence that the Syrian regime were using weapons that were in fact illegal and obviously morally reprehensible, and it enabled people to react emotionally, obviously, from the photographs, but also, in a sense, kind of juridically, to say, look, this crosses the line.
It's easy to feel that you are exploiting the people or the situation. I was in Pakistan and very close where I was standing with the camera. There was a suicide attack. The first reaction as a cameraman, take the camera and run to the scene. And suddenly a man that had lost the two legs and part of his face was really damaged from the explosion. Suddenly he did like, you know, I was bothering him with the light of my camera. So at that point I was thinking, well, this man is gonna die maybe very soon. And maybe the last thing he's going to remember is an idiot with a light on his face.
I'm not sure that I'm of the opinion that the media need to respect the suffering of those who suffer. I don't mean to be cruel here, but the media are out there to provide a firsthand, up-close picture of what happens. The media aren't making these events, in most cases, happen. The media are not responsible for the news that they bring us.
Most of it too horrifying to broadcast.
In 2013, when militants from the Somalia-based Al-Shabaab group attacked the Westgate shopping mall in the Kenyan capital of Nairobi, amidst wall-to-wall coverage of the story, one image published in the Nation newspaper set off a wave of public outrage and prompted the paper to issue an apology on TV.
We apologize to the family of the victim and to our readers.
This year, when the Malaysia Airlines plane crashed in eastern Ukraine, killing all 298 people on board, the New York Times published this photograph on their front page. There was a similar wave of criticism from readers, but this time round, there was no apology. Dean Baquet, the newspaper's executive editor, called the image one of the most beautiful pictures of war he'd seen in a long time. This, he said, is not the time for antiseptic coverage.
Well, there was reactions from some newspapers and from the public that the images were disrespectful of the dead. In my view, those who went to photograph it were incredibly moved by what they found, but also impelled by, if you like, the journalistic duty to report as a witness on the event as best that they could.
Actually, I think the photographer was trying to be very careful. You don't see the face. So he tries to cover the identity of the person. You just see the feet.
The flip side of that was this image published during the Boston bombings in 2013. It originally showed a body part, which was then photoshopped out, triggering a debate online as to whether that was the right thing to do.
The newest troops in South Vietnam for the United States.
US media haven't always been so careful. In the late 60s and early 70s, some coverage of Vietnam brought the war into US living rooms in a way that had never been seen before.
Almost every convoy that moves down this road takes casualties.
And some said it helped end an unwinnable war. But 30 years later, in the post-9/11 era, things seem to have changed. The US media are more selective, images are less graphic, and some outlets have been accused of sheltering the public from the reality of war. But when it comes to making an editorial call on how graphic an image can be, it doesn't just depend on what the image shows, but who it shows and where it's taken.
In a Western media, there is a big double standards about when to show explicit images and when not. When it's in the US, oh, you need to be careful. But then when we show images of fighting in Middle East, in Africa, in Asia, that's okay, you know. To show a guy shooting and killing someone in Syria, that's okay. You know, we accept that.
The internet may be changing what's being accepted. Social media feeds countless images onto the web every day that wouldn't make it past a news editor. And as citizen journalism gathers force, tells its own truths, breaks up hierarchies of information, the traditional media are feeling the pressure to compete, which may lower the bar they're setting for themselves.
There's a pressure on you to push you to show more and more. The kind of videos we have to deal with now, very often they are not shot by us, and first of them are the beheadings from the Islamic State. So what do we do with that? Do we really want to show people's heads cut off, brain destroyed in front of the camera, etc., etc.? Most of the time the answer is no.
When we saw Gaddafi in Libya, the people who took his picture were the people that killed him. And so there's much more potential for propaganda where amateurs, that is to say, people that are in fact combatants within a conflict, become managers and manipulators and disseminators of images.
Is it good that there are people out there with cameras? I say absolutely. I say the more pictures that can flood our public sphere, the more full will be our knowledge of the events that they are depicting. But what we need to remember is to be responsible in terms of how we understand the pictures that are being thrown our way.
More voices on the download now on News Imagery.
But if your country is big enough to fight in a war, it needs to be big enough to look at it. At the same time, you have to walk a very fine line in terms of what you show. It's important that we don't shield people from the realities of war, but it's apparent that some images are only shown for their shock value, rather than their ability to educate. Images are often meant to persuade, and we have to remain cognizant of this.
These images bring the reality of the world to the audience and makes the story real. However, there are certain images that should not be shown as they are, but should be censored to a certain extent, because there are certain parts of the picture that need not be seen.